Welcome to Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. I am your host, GV Pawan Kumar. It is my delight and pleasure to introduce you to the guest on this particular episode, Harinath Chakrapani. Harinath is a senior professor of chemistry at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Pune. And he has very interest in chemistry and also beyond chemistry in science education and various different aspects of policy. One of the aspects which is very fascinating about his research is that he looks at organic chemistry and also connects that to very important applications in drug discovery, including nitric oxide prodrugs and related areas. So, with this very short introduction, let me welcome Hari on Pratidwani.
Thank you, Pawan. It's a pleasure and privilege to be a part of this show. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, same here, same here. So, Hari, we'll start with the origins. Tell us how you got interested in science. What was where were you born? What was the kind of motivation you got? And let us know about your origins. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm born in Madras. Now it's called Chennai, and I grew up pretty much all my life. I did all my education in Madras, and so the connection with science is very interesting. I was in a school of overachievers, and I was one of the underperformers there. So suffice to say that I was clearly not the teacher's pet in any measure of the word. But I felt that I had a very good rational upbringing in both my home and the school. So there were elements of science already ingrained in me through the various exposures that I had during my childhood. But so the sort of reason, one of the reasons I got into science was through an elimination. So it was very clear that I did not want to be an engineer, and neither did I want to become a doctor, which were the two major professions that many students aspired for those days. And I like chemistry. I had a intuitive sense, and that sort of I understood and enjoyed chemistry a lot. I also like biology, and I
Mhm.
had it as one of my subjects in 11th and 12th. So therefore, I sort of was inclined in that field. And then I got this opportunity to do a BSc chemistry in Loyola College, and that's where my affiliation with science really started.
Nice, nice. So, growing up in Chennai, given that the ecosystem is already kind of very pro education, especially in the cities and across most of the Tamil Nadu, it is the case. How was it? What was your experience, schooling and college and other things? How was it? Just give
See,
us a
the joke that goes around is this word centum. I don't know if you've heard of this
yes.
word. Centum is the minimum requirement for being a good student in Chennai. I'm sure it was in other places as well, but my exposure is so you need to get centum in mathematics. I would struggle quite a bit in mathematics, and so clearly I was not one of uh, the sort of traditional ways of looking at good students, and that also gave me this perspective that each child has a different set of skills, and although our society has some ideas about what good, bad, ugly are,
Mm-mm.
but each child has an innate and ability, and it is our responsibility as citizens, responsible citizens, to identify those abilities. And so I struggled with it. I'll be very honest about it. I struggled with it because I was not aligning with what the education system expected from me. But I was also comfortable with it because I felt that I had the confidence that I would be able to do well, or at least to survive. And I attribute a lot of that to my parents, because my
Mm,
parents
mm,
were very supportive of me. They had the confidence in me, and that really helped. Okay. Now coming to the undergraduate part of your question, where colleges, and so Loyola College was an excellent college. I was very fortunate to have a group of really outstanding teachers. They really transformed my life. And I should name some of them because that's only fair that I name them. Professor Srinivasan, Professor Govindarajan, Professor Santanam, Professor Dayalan. These are Professor D.P. Shankaran. These are veteran teachers by the time I had joined, and and they were so kind. They were so welcoming. They were so nice to students in general. And that was a change. That was a big change in my life because you could still expect high standards and be nice to students and be kind to students. And Pawan, you know very well that we like to do this in IISER. It's
Yes,
ingrained
yes.
in our culture that we are very very friendly and also friendly and very kind to students, and we also want we expect high standards. So you can do both. That was a big revelation for me. But I also realized at this point the value of having a good teacher in your life, a good guru, as we say in our culture.
Hmm.
And that guru shishya sort of relationship is very powerful. And if it's used well, I think, and if you're able to inculcate it, I think it has long term impact on how one can grow into to meaningful careers and meaningful work that can be done from individuals. And so somewhere during my BSc, I realized that I'm too young to join the workforce. And my father was in the private sector, and I've seen him, you know, the kind of work and lifestyle that he had, and I felt that I need some more time. So then, after doing a little bit of brainstorming, I figured that PhD is one of the ways in which you can extend your the time that you have to become to join the workforce, so to speak. So then I, decided that I'll go ahead and do my PhD, and I have a couple of people in my own family who are well educated by that time. In my life, there's my uncle who was a medical doctor and also a researcher. He was key to setting up a major research foundation in Chennai, which is called Shankar Netralaya
Hmm.
Vision Research Foundation. And another uncle was a veterinary doctor. So he also had all of these had strong influences on me. And that's how my journey towards research started, with with absolutely no knowledge of what research is.
Is yeah, that is very common to probably most of the people who would enter this area. uh, it's also very interesting that yeah, one of the things which I have observed both while interacting and also listening to your talks is the exposition. In fact, you're also a very popular teacher in NICER. A lot of students actually do like and gravitate not only just to uh, take your class but also interact with you and get feedback and other things. Was that also a kind of a training you got as part of your education? I'm sure it would have been cultivated over the years, but because this is very important, it also probably kind of connects to the upbringing both at home and at the schooling. Were there any specific influences on that end?
Okay, so teaching is something I don't know how I started liking it, but I think I was not averse to it, to begin with, even as a kid in 11th standard or 12th standard, I was not averse to it. I thought it was a good profession to be in.
Mm,
Whereas most of the students in my class, if not all, were all going towards the JEE, and the so they were more career oriented, and I was like, I don't think teaching is a bad profession. That was so I was not very strong in my opinion at that
mm,
time.
mm.
But then later on, when I joined BSc, we had a very diverse background of students. So I came from a lot of privilege because I studied in one of the, like I said, one of the overachieving schools in Chennai. And whereas some of the students came from very modest backgrounds, quite rural areas, and they studied in Tamil medium,
Mm, mm.
so till 12th. And so they would come to class and they would essentially not understand about 70% of what was taught in class. So slowly I started interacting with these students. I would, of course, we are all friends here in this. We would play
Yeah.
cricket, we would hang out quite a bit. We would watch movies, go to whatever. So this culture of being together was very strong. And then I realized, that some of the concepts I could teach or I could explain to them in a way that they would understand it. And this was done in a mixture of Tamil and English, right? Because in
Yeah.
class, the
Yeah.
medium of instruction was English,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like I said, I'm privileged because I have that head start, so to speak, right? And so it sort of then it made me feel good about it. You feel good that you're helping out somebody, but actually in the process, it is a more of a selfish thing because your concepts become stronger when you
Mm.
teach and when you
Yeah.
explain things better, which I did not realize at that time. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so my foundations were quite strong, at least in chemistry at that time, because of these interactions. And then slowly I started gravitating towards, why not I take up this as a career.
Mm. Mm.
So my initial intention of doing PhD was, of course, to not join the workforce, but also to become a teacher. And to become a teacher, you need to study. You need to
Yeah.
qualify yourself, and that sort
Yeah.
of research came in much later.
Mm.
And my passion for research is very high. But I would consider that I'm more of a teacher, or I like teaching a lot more as a career than most others, and
Mm.
that's you will see that in my interactions with students.
Yeah.
So
That's very very interesting. It is also some kind of a realization you'll have as you progress, because there is also a personal temperament to which you will kind of get uh, gravitated towards, because not everybody would have similar kind of viewpoint on everything. And I'm very glad that you mentioned this, and also the point what you mentioned about the feedback what you get from teaching makes you a better researcher, and also even better
absolutely,
a person
yeah,
in science. uh,
yeah,
Given that this kind of foundation you had, where you went to so-called overachieving school, and then also Loyola College, which is actually quite reputed in Chennai, and furthermore you again went to another big institution, not just in Chennai but also in India, so to speak, which is IIT Madras.
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your experience, because the master's program is also quite rigorous there,
Yes,
and
yes,
give us a gist about how it also motivated you to really go forward with chemistry.
yeah, yeah, sure. So the sort of journey from Loyola to IIT Madras is only like maybe 12, 15 kilometers in actual distance. But in terms of virtual distance, it's really challenging to get from that point to the other point. Well, what happened is, like, since I decided that I'm going to do a PhD, then I did a little bit of homework, and suddenly I started getting interested in my career. And so I thought, okay, so I did some digging, and people advised that, IIT is a good place. There
Mm,
are excellent IITs, they have a master's program. And so if you go there, you may qualify yourself quite well, and that may help you secure a PhD admission in top places,
mm,
both in India as well as abroad. I it wasn't particularly clear to me that I would go anywhere for my PhD, or whether it was India or US. But it's sort of, there was some understanding that if you do your MSc there, you may improve your chances of going to a good place, wherever it
mm,
is.
mm,
So with that sort of mindset, I said, let's find out what it is. And there's an exam. All of us have to write exams for everything. So there's a common admission exam and for IIT Madras, and I mean, it's not common. It's an admission exam for
mm,
IIT Madras, and so I started studying for it, and I also had to go to Kharagpur. Those days, the exams were conducted individually by each IIT. So I went
mm,
to
mm,
Kharagpur, wrote the exam there. Went to Kanpur, IIT Kanpur, wrote the exam there. Also came to Madras and wrote the exam. I mean, I got into IIT Madras, and it was close to my home, and I'd heard good things about it, and so I decided to join there. Now, after joining IIT Madras, so IIT Madras is an excellent overall. It's one of the outstanding places to
yeah.
study. You may have seen their campus,
Yes. Yes.
beautiful campus. Excellent quality of people there. I had some very good teachers in IIT Madras. But what influenced me in terms of my next step towards PhD was my project. So that is a project that I did with Professor M.S. Gopinathan.
Mhm.
who's a computational slash mathematics mathematical modeling. He used to work on that, and so keep in mind that I was not very good at mathematics, right? So and yet I keep telling this story to students. If you run away from a particular subject, it usually comes
It
back.
comes back. So
So,
true. So true.
so during my BSc, I had mathematics as my so what we call here as minor, but those days it
Mm,
was called
mm.
ancillary subject.
Yeah.
That was 5 credits, 10 credits. It's like a lot of mathematics, and then okay, now I'm done. Let me move on to MSc. And then in MSc, I had this. I did some work on mathematical modeling of chemical oscillatory reactions. So I had to
Mm,
learn differential equations, how to do MATLAB, writing code, and all that stuff. So I did fairly well. I really enjoyed it, but then I realized that experiments is where my heart is.
mm, mm.
So that was a very good learning experience for me. And then I moved ahead to do my PhD in experimental chemistry.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So before we jump into your further kind of explorations into chemistry, organic chemistry, what is the kind of lesson you took away from your education up to masters? Was there anything specific which really had a deeper impact and also motivated you towards chemistry? Is there a specific aspect of chemistry which you really liked?
Yeah, so I think uh, during my BSc and in part during MSc, labs were very important.
Mm,
Right? So, for example, in BSc we had quite a bit of laboratory training,
mm,
and that sort of it works both ways. It's a mixed bag. So because some of the reactions are you're given a recipe and you do the add whatever is
mm,
required,
mm.
say filter it and so on. It helped in using your hands and trying to understand what actually goes on. But it also helps strengthen your foundations because many of those tests are actually useful in identifying analytes or functional groups and so on. So that it was very helpful. But on the other hand, we don't develop a research mindset
Mm,
because
mm.
you're repeating what somebody else has done. You don't ask new questions. You don't try to answer new questions, for example. Okay. In MSc, our lab was very rigorous, fairly lengthy, and we had Viva. That was
Mm.
something that was
Mhm.
very good, and so you would be quizzed on what you have done, why you have done it, and I think that helped in sort of the rigor in
Yeah,
understanding theory. But you still did not know what research was. So the research was really came to me in my second year of MSc. That is my sort of major sort of my adventure with research.
research. Nice,
And then you
nice.
understand, oh, this is if I actually do this, then I can find something totally new.
Mm,
And that sort of created the you very well understand the joy and happiness that you get in finding something new. So that
absolutely.
contributed to that. And overall, I think my experience was very good. I had uh, really good friends, good mentors, good support.
Mm,
And that helped me sort of put things in perspective. But the last thing I want to mention during for my 5 years in my undergraduate and postgraduate is the kind of exposure that I got outside
mm.
of chemistry. I think that's very important that I make that mention because many students we see in our own institute and anywhere else, they struggle with the big picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And that I somehow did not have a problem with it. I think that there was always that perspective that I got. See, for
Mm,
example, in my undergraduate, we had a 3 credit course where we had to, and I did it initially very grudgingly, but you had to go to near St. Thomas Mount. There were some schools, and you have to go and interact with those kids and see if they have problems with chemistry and teach them some chemistry or whatever science that they were trying to deal with. Right? It was a course, and we had to do it.
mm,
Right? Initially,
mm.
I said, okay, Tika, let's go and see what it is. But it changes your life. I think
Absolutely.
at that age, to interact with students and understand where they are, what where we are, and what kind of struggles they have, and how. you know, how we could sort of address those,
And yeah.
that really helped. Similarly, in IIT Madras as well, there was this program where we had to go nearby schools and sort of help kids with 11th and 12th,
Mm,
basically,
mm.
up to each standard, right? So I did that on quite a few occasions, and that these are things that give you the perspective of where you are as opposed to the rest of the society.
So, yeah.
So these are very important learnings for me because that gave me the idea that these are important problems that we need to solve as a
Mm.
individual, and gave me a big picture and a broader goal rather than a narrow focus. That
Narrow focus.
so these were very important to me. Other than chemistry, chemistry of course was very very crucial.
Wonderful. In fact, it's such an important thing what you mentioned, because more and more, uh, it has been always that way, but nowadays, that having that big picture and trying to put stuff in the context of what you're doing is so critical. Now that you have got this exposure and excellent training, also from reputed institutions, you now move to Northern America, to USA. So tell us about the transition. How did the transition happen, and to where did you go, and what was the thing you did in that particular place,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah. So, well, uh, I'll sort of give a little bit of background that it is not a fairy tale. So people look at CVs and think, this is great, that is good. But I had a very interesting and sometimes frustrating experience during PhD, and I'll share, and I'm very happy to share that. I share that with my students as well,
Very
uh,
important. Yeah.
and it also a very pleasant experience.
Mm,
So it's a mixed bag. Always
mm,
choices that we make are all it's always a mixed bag. So I moved to Duke University, which is located in North
yeah.
Carolina, and I joined there, and they basically said that here's your lab,
Mm.
and you have to teach. They gave me the keys to the lab. They said here's your handbook, go do those experiments on your own, and you're responsible for three batches of 25 students each. Okay, so I've had
Nice.
absolutely all I've done is a little bit of teaching here and there with them.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
friendly. You can make a lot of mistakes, and nobody is really. And then I was put in the situation, and also you have to do your coursework because you have
Mm,
coursework, and that's fairly rigorous. so, so it was very, very, very stressful. In a also in a pleasant way because it helped.
mm,
I wanted to teach, like I told you, right? So
mm.
I took it up as a challenge, and the most important challenge for me was accent because
Haha.
uh,
Nice.
although English is very close to our hearts, but the way we
Mm.
speak English is very different. The way undergrads in the US
Yeah, you're right.
used to. So it was tough. I had to write things on the board sometimes to explain
Mm.
what I was trying to tell them. And so it was very interesting. And it was as they call it, baptism by fire. There's
Fire.
no
Yes.
some little bit of help, orientation, and all that, but basically you're on your own.
Yes.
So that was very interesting. The second interesting aspect of my first year was the ability to grade,
Mm. Mm.
not ability, but the requirement for us to grade, right? So we have to give a grade to each
Mm.
student, and of course, there was a senior person who was above us who would look through and make sure that if there are any, but still, that's something that all of a sudden you have to evaluate lab notebooks and so on and so forth. So that was the second interesting part. But third part was the culture.
Mm.
I think I tell this here as well in our labs. There was not a single case where a student will never wear goggles and lab coat during their lab. Okay, we have made it available to students in IISER, and we put it in the handbook. And each time we have to remind them why they need to wear goggles, and you'll still see a lot of violations.
Mm. Mm.
I think the discipline that I had, that I could see in the students there, was quite high. There were other issues, of course, that I don't want to get into. But I'm saying, on the whole, these were some different, culturally different things.
Different.
And I had a lot of friends who were American. That gave me a good exposure to diversity in culture. We had people from the US, different parts of the US. We had people from uh, the West Indies. We had people from
Mm.
China. There were quite a few people from China. So you got that exposure to various cultures, and then you realize that your culture is not the only one that's the best, or the and it is very good. There are good aspects on in
Mm.
everything. So
Absolutely.
these are the formative years in the US, were sort of getting acclimatized and adjusted to this kind of a setup.
Wonderful. So that's a very important thing, because you will actually get exposed to so many things which you would have otherwise not got exposed to at all. That's what travel actually does, and more so if you stay in a country for a reasonably long time, then you really start seeing and contrasting a kind of cultures, taking also good things from any particular culture, what you are getting exposed to. You would have also experienced similar thing in research. You also mentioned already the teaching aspect. In research, how was your experience? What questions you were interested in during that time?
Yeah. So
Mm,
the major focus of my interest was in organic chemistry.
mm,
So, as
mm,
you know, organic chemistry deals with compounds, synthesis, characterization, what these compounds can do. Uh, so applications as well. And as many of you may know, most of the drugs that we consume, the good ones and the bad ones, are all
mm, mm.
essentially, most of them are organic compounds.
Organic, yes,
And
yes.
so it's a rich area for research, and I really liked it. Right, so that was my primary focus. I started out my PhD by doing a lot of organic synthesis, and and then sort of the basic idea of my work was to synthesize some compounds using asymmetric synthesis. Asymmetric synthesis means you make one isomer of a molecule as compared to another isomer. And why this is important is because many
Mm,
drugs are single isomers, and sometimes when you administer the other isomer, it can be toxic, it can have side effects, and so on.
mm,
So to put it in context, it's a very important area of work. I also did my work in an area where you may mention nitric oxide
mm.
generators. So that was part of my PhD, and so I had the unique experience of. I think every PhD is unique, but mine is more unique than others, right? That's what we all like to think. I actually switched my supervisor during my PhD.
Oh,
And
okay, okay.
that was a very interesting experience. And I got to know how well the system works in the US,
Mm,
how supportive they are of students. And, so that was so therefore I had the opportunity to work in two different labs during my
mm.
PhD. And that was very helpful also, getting exposed to two different areas of inquiry.
Nice, nice. So this also means that you probably were already thinking about organic chemistry in a deeper sense. You were you already kind of interested in specific areas of organic chemistry, including nitrogen oxide and also nitric oxide and asymmetric synthesis, which you also mentioned about.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, Means is that you went into that area and got interested, or was there already a pre-developed idea of going into that?
I don't think that I had enough exposure to
Mm,
either of
mm,
those areas from, like I said, my research was in computational chemistry, which had
mm,
nothing to
mm,
do with what I was doing for my PhD. So I didn't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but I
mm,
realized that if I have to do I wanted to do experiments. And that's
mm,
my primary thing. And so experimental science, you need to work in this one of these areas that are. But more importantly, I think, Pawan, what is frequently lost in many of our conversations here
mm.
is the training aspect.
Yes,
I think doctoral work is a very important training opportunity, right? Because
absolutely.
you're trying to solve
Absolutely.
problems, you're
Mm,
trying to publish papers, you're trying to. move forward in your thing. But the training aspects are sometimes ignored. So I was, like I said, I had the privilege of having
mm,
excellent opportunities to train. So I had learned things which, how to run a GC, gas chromatograph,
yeah.
how to separate enantiomers. And then I moved to a field which was sort of related, but one can also argue that it is quite different.
Mm, mm,
Quite a bit of work on things which are not directly related to asymmetric synthesis. But this was the foundational years. I realized that, NO was something that I really, nitric oxide is something that I really liked in terms of as a field. And so I spoke to my advisor towards the end of my PhD, and I told him, I would like to continue in this field because my exposure to this field is not is good, but I want a deeper
deeper.
understanding of
Mm,
what's going on. So I moved to do a postdoc in a nearby institution, which is called Wake Forest University.
big first.
And so my PhD completed with Professor Eric Toon. Incredible guy, very smart, very helpful, very kind person. Uh, you know, excellent teacher. So
Mm,
these are the influences that I really gained from during my PhD. And then I moved to work with Bruce King, who's also a fantastic guy. Teaching in an undergraduate institution and publishing really good papers. And due to various visa constraints and all that, I moved from there to the National Cancer Institute,
mm, mm,
where I continued to work on nitric oxide. And I joined the lab of Dr. Larry Kiefer, who was a very well-established scientist in the National Cancer Institute. And our focus there was an extension of what I did with NO, but to understand the role that NO plays in cancer,
mhm, mhm.
how we could use certain compounds that generate NO to inhibit some very, very difficult to treat cancers. As you know, cancer is still a major problem globally.
Absolutely.
So I worked not only in synthesis, making these compounds, trying to analyze them, working. I learned how to do some cell culture there and started doing some assays in cells. And I also sort of got an exposure to how animal experiments are done because we had a very good animal experiment facility. And I did not do them myself, but I would work with scientists who got them done. And so I was very closely associated with the study itself. And it gave me a very different perspective and really good broad sense of what it is to be in the field of drug discovery or any translational work.
Nice. That's wonderful. So you would have also got a very good sampling of these areas. Also, maybe some exposure to also questions related to, industrial applications of the work, and
and, and,
that
and, and some aspects of translational work. So
translational work. Yeah.
patenting was a part of my PhD. My
Yeah.
PhD advisor has been a part of startups.
Oh, wonderful.
And my
Wonderful.
postdoc, one of my postdoc mentors was very close to, you know, getting a compound into preclinical stages and so on. So it was a very different kind of exposure
Mm, mm.
that I really got in the NCI.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So then again, a transition happens
Yes.
after that, and this is a transition I generally ask people to be explicit in why the transition happens of moving back to India. It is something which I'm always fascinated, and I always keep asking whomsoever has had experience, especially outside India. Majority of the times, people who have got PhDs in the US and also including universities in Europe and other places may have opportunities to also stay back or explore anywhere across the world, any kind of academic or even industrial positions. And yet, uh, the transition was made and you came back to India.
Yeah.
Why did that happen?
I still ask myself that question. No, so there was one thing that remained constant from day one to I lived in the US for 10 years to the last
Mm,
day left on the morning I left to come back to India was that I wanted to come back home, come back to India. That was
mm,
clear. So what typically happens is that after year one, year two, people feel very strongly, and then you sort of get used to the system there. I mean, I will. I will have no qualms about saying that United States is a wonderful place to
Mm,
live.
mm,
I really like the place. It's a very open society, very professional in work environment, and I really enjoyed my 10 years that I lived there. But since I always wanted to come back, that I can attribute to my 5 years in my undergraduate and MSc.
okay, let me
At the
see. Yeah.
big picture, and I really felt that we need to set up something in India with
Mm,
this kind of research focus, and sort of push teaching also. Since I really like teaching,
mm,
I think
mm.
we should also make meaningful contributions in teaching if we can. At that point I
Absolutely.
did not know anything about teaching because I had only taught a little bit
Mm,
during my PhD and so on, right? What is it to run a course from end to end? I had no clue about that. So to me, it was an obvious choice to come back. Uh, in fact, I would view it the other way. I would say that I still can't figure out why people want to stay back in the
mm.
US. There are India's wonderful opportunities here for growth, for impact. The kind of science that you can do, also you can do. You can be fairly competitive. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
and and I think each person has to make a choice of by themselves. And for me, it was too obvious. So, in fact, my postdoc mentor asked me, uh, why I mean, I can't give you this visa which will help you immigrate to the US. Can I give you this other visa? I said, I don't want the visa that helps me to immigrate. I want the visa that helps me to go back. So it was clear to me, whatever, I had absolutely no doubt in my mind.
Doubt about it.
So that's why it's difficult for me to explain why.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. In fact, this is always the case because the roots actually have very interesting connections to later part of choice of the careers. I understand there are also very many people who would have graduated in similar circumstances like you from IITs, would have stayed back in the US for various different reasons. But there are also some very interesting connections you really get inspired from, as you mentioned, and that's always a very important thing. And also it also shows the variety of ways in which one can have a career, right? That is an important thing, because most of the time students are kind of little apprehensive of making career choices, and sometimes they preempt thinking that if I take this step, this might actually be difficult for me to do and
Yeah.
not do the other things. But that is one lesson I keep learning, having kind of talked to a lot of people. That choice sometimes is kind of not even deliberated. It is actually an automatic choice. Like, okay, so why? No,
And,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
and you got to go with your gut. I
gut,
mean,
exactly, exactly.
and for me, thankfully, you know, I started looking for opportunities in 2008. So I
Mm,
went to the US in 99.
mm.
I started looking for opportunities in 2008. And, IISER Pune had just started.
Start. Yeah.
And so it was, I visited there and, I visited briefly in 2007 when I came to Pune for a personal visit. And
Mm.
I was very sort of intrigued by the whole idea, doing so 2008 when I came here, and I sort of was very impressed with the with what was really fledgling institute at that point. There was really only a piece of land,
Line.
very little infrastructure, but there were ideas,
I guess. Yeah.
and they were
Yeah.
grand. There was a grand vision, and there was a grand idea, and and that I really bought into that, and I really felt that this is a wonderful opportunity for us
Yes.
to take up, and it's an adventure. I view this as an adventure. If you like, for example, when I changed my advisor, people told me, oh, your academic career is finished. You're not going to whatever, right? I said it's okay. I mean, let's see what happens, and I don't think it adversely affected my career. But it could have affected others. I'm not saying that it's
Others.
not
Mm.
true. But what I'm saying is that you have to go with your gut. I feel very strongly that is something that students don't, or people don't want to move forward with. They are a little apprehensive of following their instincts.
Instincts. Yeah. Yeah, that's something very important. Again, because one can understand the anxiety, because there is an uncertainty in going forward. A lot of them also have to kind of support their families.
Yeah.
Because in sciences, most of the time, especially if you're coming from basic sciences, the question they would have had addressed and they would have to answer to their kind of ecosystem is how do you really make a career out of it? Because engineering is slight, and even medicine is slightly easier to convince, telling that you would have a slightly more lucrative career vis-a-vis sciences.
Yeah.
But that's an important point actually, because
Yes. So I want to make it absolutely clear that,
Mhm.
you know, financial consideration was not something
Mhm.
that I thought about,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And that was because probably I did not have to think about it as
Think
much.
about it.
So,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
I am by no means suggesting that it's an easy decision for
Mhm.
many.
Mhm.
It's not, and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
opportunities in the US or in Europe where you're compensated to a much higher level
Much higher. Yeah.
is great. And I think, and I completely understand and appreciate that part of the decision
The
making. And that,
decision making. Yeah.
so thankfully I did not have to uh, think about it as much.
As
Uh,
much. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
exactly. That again, that's one of the learnings through these conversations is there are no two lives which actually are similar.
no,
Even if you
absolutely.
take people from the same background, same place, even twins, if you
Yeah,
take, you would never have the same kind of that lineage of how the things percolate in their individual lives. And that's
absolutely.
quite remarkable. That's quite remarkable. So Hari, now that you actually had moved back, I think you moved back in 2009, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
Yeah. Uh, See, one of the things, and I also looked up as a faculty who joined a year after you, and
yeah,
there was a great learning kind of process for me too. Is that you are one of the few people whom I see that you have been able to do research, contribute to teaching, and also I'll come to some other initiatives which you took, which I believe is one of the most important initiatives, where you have also played a role in establishing some aspects of training teachers, which I think is probably one of the most important thing what as a scientist we can also contribute to the society. Before we go to the specifics, I want to ask the question, uh, was this kind of overall kind of faculty contribution was something you thought about? Because I know that you were already interested in teaching and research was anyway there, but it's a kind of a probably a dream for any administration in a university system to have a person of this kind, because one would be able to contribute such a kind of multiple levels, and yet also you train more than like 14 15 PhD students, and so many of the undergrad students, as I mentioned. You still also continue to mentor so many of the other students. I want to first get a gist of this overall viewpoint, what you have developed and contributed to the institution, and it's something which I also keep telling for even younger faculty to look up and think about this way of doing it. In my opinion, it's a very fulfilling way of doing our jobs. But I want to hear from the horse mouth, so to speak,
yeah.
because I want to. This is an important thing I felt, which is very unique in your own context. So, could you please let us know a little bit more?
So, Pawan, the short answer is I didn't think about it too much.
Mm, mm,
I think whatever task that was given to me, see, there are two aspects to it. One is that the leadership,
mm.
IISER Pune, uh, you realized when you joined, and the supportive uh,
Yeah,
visionary leader
absolutely.
we had, uh, sort of they gave opportunities to different people for doing different
Mm,
things. I don't think people were not given opportunities. And the way I viewed it was that, it is part of institutional building. Whatever you do, whether you do research, whether you do teaching, whether you do
yeah.
administration, So I was put in committees very early on
Mm, mm,
and so on. And for me, it was a learning opportunity.
mm,
Again,
mm,
I come back to the big picture that developed as an undergraduate and as a master's
mm,
student, that it's all fits in very nicely to me because my big picture was clear.
mm, mm.
So it wasn't like, you need to do only this, only that. So there are multiple ways in which you can learn, multiple ways in which you can contribute. So whatever tasks that were given, I took it up and, sort of contributed in whatever best way I could, whether it was in curriculum or
Mm.
in new campus committee or space allocation, whatever it was,
Got it.
activity
Yeah.
committee. So I enjoyed the opportunities. Of course, it meant that there was a lot of time that I spent.
Mm.
My typical work hours as an assistant professor was uh, quite very long, and
Mm.
because by the time you do all this work,
Mm.
teaching, all that, you don't get much time for research. So night was the time when you do. I would go home, have dinner, come back,
Come
stay until
back. Yeah.
2 a.m., 2 a.m., all bumped into each other late in the evening. Then again, go sleep for a few hours, come back, work 7 days a week. I'm not saying that we should. It was my
Mm.
choice. Nobody forced me to do any of these things.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was a supportive family
Yeah.
environment also that helped me, sort of in this regard. So I think I don't see any of these activities as being. I never viewed it as a inconvenience or.
Inconvenience.
And also I give a lot of credit to Professor Ganesh and Professor
Yeah.
Shashi,
Yeah. Yeah.
who sort of took us along.
Mm.
I
Mm.
think they would give opportunities, they would sort of put us in committees, and then they took us along the journey. They made us feel as important stakeholders. We were very junior in the system,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and yet we could object. We could say that this is not
Yeah.
a good idea. We could present a better idea, have an open
Absolutely.
conversation, and resolve things. So that culture was very very good, and that helped us, all of us, including you. I mean, I've seen you
Absolutely. Absolutely.
contribute in multiple ways in the department and for the institute. So I think that ownership of thing activities was quite normal at that time.
Wonderful. In fact, that freedom to express whatever you feel. In fact, I'm very glad that at least that culture has stayed along all throughout the time
Absolutely.
in IISER Pune, because infrastructure. Of course, you would always want it to be better, get better, but that ability to communicate freely with your colleagues, no matter what is the hierarchy, and that is one thing which is probably we have preserved as an institution, and that I think is something which we should be very proud of, and probably continue to do that
Yeah,
as
and
we.
also it takes effort to keep it intact. I think
Absolutely.
we
Absolutely.
all have to work very hard
Very hard. Yeah.
to preserve it.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. So one aspect, Hari, I should also mention to the viewers, listeners, and others, is that Hari also plays cricket for our faculty team. He's been one of the most regular
Not as well
person.
as Pawan, but
Yes,
yes.
yes. Well. It's the same thing. Always, we've all actually grown older playing cricket matches throughout, and that is one thing we are very, very, very proud of as part of our binding activity. The faculty team has been consistently playing without kind of missing any of the so-called IISER Premier League cricket
Yes.
tournaments, and Hari has been an integral part of it.
We have
And
been
second part,
consistent,
yeah,
inconsistent.
yeah, consistent in actually showing up, inconsistent in winning, but nevertheless,
Yes.
showing up is half done,
Yeah,
in that way. Yeah, the other part, Hari, you also kind of mentioned, but I want to also emphasize that you also do work related to patents, in the sense you actually not only published your work, but also try to translate it to the outside world, and that's a unique aspect also, which I had to explicitly mention. So now give us a brief gist of the kind of questions you are interested in your research group, and also other activities will come to the
Yeah.
aspects.
So basically, the work that we are presently doing, we work on two sort of interesting areas. One is on antimicrobial resistance,
Hmm.
which I think many of you know that
Yeah.
bugs are becoming less sensitive to antibiotics. So we're looking at mechanisms by which we could improve existing antibiotics, and for this we are looking at enzymes or proteins that are important for resistance in the pathogen, which contribute to resistance, and see how we can either inhibit them or figure out how. we can circumvent those pathways. So what we're doing is we want to preserve, essentially try to preserve the existing class of antibiotics. That is one approach. In the AMR field, it's a very complex socio-economic problem. It's not something that can be easily solved. But the second part is that can we identify new drug targets? That is,
Mm,
these are
mm,
new targets that medicinal chemists or those interested in drug discovery can try to develop compounds for. So broadly, there are multiple sub areas here, but this is one area that our lab works on. The other area that we have sort of started working on probably for the last 6, 7 years is in this field of trying to understand how degeneration happens.
mm,
So what I mean by degeneration is that many conditions like neurodegenerative disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, chronic diseases like diabetes or even osteoarthritis and so on, they all have some sort of a common theme. And one of the common themes is
mm,
that they have high levels of that they can have high levels of inflammation. So I think all of
mm.
us know after COVID what inflammatory markers
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
So that's something that has become common jargon now. But one thing that we want to do, we have been doing now recently, and we're getting some good results there as well, is to see if we can use the cell's own machinery
Mm,
to reduce inflammation or to reduce what is called oxidative stress, which is right. So we're working on areas like neuroinflammation, how to bring down neuroinflammation, how to bring down inflammation in arthritis, osteoarthritis, for example. So we have some interesting animal data, and that's where your translational comment came in. We are
mm,
a basic science lab,
mm,
so
mm.
most of my students do a lot of synthesis, a lot of
Synthesis. Yeah.
characterization, but we do take those 2, 3 steps ahead through collaborations, and I think all of this is possible only
Yeah.
through developing a team of multidisciplinary scientists who have a shared sort of research interests. And so I've been
Yes.
fortunate to work with some outstanding individuals who have contributed really well to these projects.
Wonderful, wonderful. This is a very important area in the sense that the relevance has kind of been now in the public eye, as you mentioned, post COVID. People really appreciate, but there is a rich history to the whole topic also, where right from vaccinations to also questions related to localized diseases which actually should be cured, because that requires kind of understanding the local ecosystem,
Yeah.
pathogens and microbial kind of percolation within the place where you are. uh, so this particular mechanism what you also mentioned about looking at these kind of questions, is it also related to something which can lead to new drugs and kind of new kind of pharmaceutical developments?
Yeah.
I'm just
So
curious.
no,
Yeah.
no, it can. So see, the
Mm,
thing is that I think so. We work with this. The team, our
mm,
team
mm,
collaborators, we work with Mycobacterium
mm,
tuberculosis. As you know, that's the causative agent of TB.
yeah,
Very,
yeah,
very complicated. Very sort of models are also very complicated
yeah,
because it's a very slow growing pathogen. For example, an experiment may take 3 months.
yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so we have some compounds which are very interesting, and we are testing them out in animal models. But animal models is one small step,
Mm,
but it is an important step. And once it sort of clears that step, that hurdle,
yes.
then there
Yeah.
are 53 other hurdles that one needs to clear before we could even start talking about getting it into the clinic, right? So we are imminently aware of that, eminently aware
Mm,
of that, and that's something that we are, we are quite sort of in touch with what's going on in. So there are other diseases like osteoarthritis, for example, which we have
mm,
started working on recently, where the steps required perhaps to get it into clinic are fewer, perhaps, right? If all your experiments succeed, or then maybe it may be faster. But we're learning that now. It's a new field for me, and we are learning how we can take the compound. But we are deeply interested in that. We want to take it forward and see if we can develop a therapeutic intervention. And but it's we are also acutely aware that it's a big gap or a area where a lot of compounds fail. The
Yeah,
success rate is
exactly.
extremely small.
Yeah, that's an important aspect. One will have to be aware of the kind of nature of the research problems. So before we also conclude, I would want to get a gist of some other kind of initiatives you have taken, mainly, in terms of bringing out this a very important program for training teachers,
Yeah,
both at the level of Maharashtra and also from the Ministry of Education. You have been granted some particular kind of a grant, so to speak, which will help IISER to set up some particular programs to train teachers. Can you just give us a gist of
sure,
that
sure.
particular thing? Yeah,
Yeah. So Pawan, I think you probably are also aware that IISER Pune, we started very early on.
yeah, yeah.
I don't mean myself, but the institute on the whole,
Institute. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
very, very early on in outreach and
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
trying to get. But an important sort of initiative was by Professor Shashidhara,
Shashi, yeah.
who set up the Center of Excellence in Science and Mathematics Education. That is a Ministry of Human Resource Development at that time, now Ministry of
Mm.
Education.
Education. Yeah.
And so there, the sort of concept of training teachers and undergraduate teachers sort of started. And I was not involved in that because I was probably too busy doing other things. And slowly I got involved and I realized the value of
Yeah,
that
yeah.
experience. And, so we have now expanded it. We have two distinct programs. One called IRISE, which is
I rise. Yes.
mainly a school teacher educator development program, and the other one is MSD, which is a Maharashtra state
Maharashtra said
uh,
yes.
undergraduate teacher education program. So these are important because we need to understand that we don't, like, again, coming back to the big picture, we need to understand that we need, if we can, again, if we don't have the bandwidth, we shouldn't take it up. But if we
Exactly.
can, we should try and strengthen the science teacher ecosystem, teaching ecosystem on the whole, not just.
Absolutely correct.
So these are some initiatives that we have taken up. And again, I don't view this as something that is extra or
Mm, mm.
something that I'm. It's just part of what. There's an opportunity, you take it, and there's a consortium that approached us saying, "Can you help us develop this teacher educator program for schools?" I said,
Mm,
"Okay,
mm.
let's do it." And so we have learned a lot. I think that will be another 2 hours of conversation, which I don't want to get into. But but it's a very interesting experiment and very interesting exercise that we have initiated in IISER Pune,
Yeah,
and I'm very proud that IISER Pune has been extremely supportive of this because
yeah,
although it's
yeah.
it's a
Absolutely.
it's really supportive, including our present leadership, Professor Sunil Bhagwat, who himself is
Mm.
an excellent teacher,
Yeah,
been incredibly supportive and helpful in making sure the administration is sort of helpful in running this program because we are now presently working in Maharashtra, Bihar,
mm.
Jharkhand, Uttar
Jharkhand.
Pradesh,
Yeah,
and we have now started recently working in Karnataka. So working in 5 states at the same time is no joke. So
absolutely,
it
absolutely.
requires a lot of support, and I'm very happy that IISER Pune has been extremely supportive of this.
Supportive. Yeah, that is one thing I have to admit. The kind of support we have got throughout all the last almost 20 years to take initiative and do something for both research and science. There has been absolutely no kind of resistance at all. If anything, there is quite a lot of encouragement to really go and do quite a lot of things, which also means that it it probably gives you new avenues to explore, and therefore also broaden the horizon and definitions of what a faculty member of an institution can be. And that is something which is kind of always a great learning process,
Hmm.
so to speak. uh, so finally, Hari, tell us a little bit about your futuristic plan. Like,
Yeah.
do you have anything specific both in terms of research, teaching, and these initiatives which you are involved in? I know you also have been a dean international relationship and communications within the institution. But tell us a little bit more of what are the things which you are kind of thinking for coming future.
Yeah, so Pawan, it's so in terms of research, I think we are very
Yeah.
keenly pushing forward our translational work
Mm.
while we continue to do more basic research. I
Mostly.
think
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
absolutely no, and these are not mutually exclusive. I keep telling everyone,
Absolutely.
I think
Absolutely.
one can do good quality work and both. But again, I like to emphasize the training part of
Mm. Mm.
PhD. I think that's something that I do try to spend time and work towards. So research wise, this is my major goal is to see if we can push forward these projects on inflammation,
Mm.
see if we
Mm.
can develop something much better than what is there in the system presently. In terms of the other activities, we have a plan to see if we can expand some of these activities to teacher development activities, for
Mm.
example, a larger scale. It makes me a little nervous because a small institute like IISER
Mm.
working on such a mammoth task, for example, the number of teachers who were recruited in Bihar recently was in several
Yeah.
thousands have been recruited.
Yeah, astonishingly large number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and we basically work with about 2,000 or 3,000 teachers.
Mm.
That's a really small number fraction compared to the larger numbers actually. So we have some ideas. We want to see if we can push those forward,
Mm.
and maybe I'll report back to you in a few years about what
Yeah,
those
yeah.
results of those experiments were. And I also invite people who listeners, viewers, and
Yeah.
anyone who wants to contribute to this, please do contact us. We'll be happy to have more people. We need more people thinking about these problems. So that's helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is something so critical for anybody to also kind of think about something going beyond what has already been done as part of their research, teaching, or any kind of thing. Even industries have been involved in these programs.
Yes.
So it need not be only just through the corporate social responsibility, but even sometimes even an individual kind of interest can propel these programs very effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hari, as you also mentioned, in fact, we would be delighted to have you at some point of time again, discussing some other aspects, going into some particular questions, and that would be a pleasure. In fact, this has been already a pleasure discussing with you, and so beautifully kind of giving us this kind of flow of intellectual kind of upbringing of yours. And I wish you all the best, and hopefully we will have many more occasions and also many interesting kind of developments
Yeah. Yeah.
coming out of your
Yeah.
lab and also from you. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you, Pawan. I think this is what you're doing is also a really important and valuable contribution because the general feeling that the society has is that scientists are not good communicators.
Yeah.
Every effort that is being made by any scientist,
Yeah.
and that to a high quality scientist such as yourself, is really appreciated, and it's a very commendable initiative from you. And so please continue to do this and let us know if we can support you in any way. Uh,
Absolutely.
oh, and it's been a great pleasure and also a privilege because I think you've had very, very high quality people on this program. And so I'm very delighted to be a part of this and hope we'll continue this conversation over coffee sometime.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the pleasure is always mine, and I keep telling this to all the people. I'm like a non-striker in this game because I really get to hear firsthand some very very brilliant minds and also so inspiring kind of thoughts. Because as you mentioned, it is necessity for scientists to communicate and the public to know what it is to really do science from various different perspectives, and people like Hari have been contributing already a lot to that. And I'm very thankful to Hari for joining us on Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. Thank you very much, Hari. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.